Pueden sentarse, por favor. Esta mañana tenemos aquí la presencia de distinguidas personas que son realmente local, y para hacer el saludo, darle bienvenida y anunciarlo, estoy llamando al podio al doctor Orlando Gutiérrez Boronat, coordinador de la Asamblea de la Resistencia y artífice de todos estos encuentros que hemos tenido, tanto nacionales como internacionales, por la libertad de Cuba. Fernando.
Muy buenos días a todos. Hoy es un día de éxito para nosotros.
Amén.
Voy a hablar brevemente, primero en inglés y después en español. Today is a great day. Today we commemorate Cuban Independence, May 20th, 1902. After over 30 years of war, after 200,000 Cubans died in the last war of independence, Cuba attained its independence. It attained its sovereignty based on individual freedom. Many peoples from around the world helped the Cubans free themselves, but there were two nations that were decisive in that support. The hundreds of Dominicans who fought for our freedom, led by General Máximo Gómez and many other Dominican patriots, and the United States of America. In that spirit, I want to speak a little more about that. In that spirit, I want to thank Senador Rick Scott for being here on a Saturday, May 20th, to commemorate this day. Senator Scott is one of the two state senators, one of the two senators who represents Florida. He's a national figure, and he's a pro-free Cuba activist. He's tireless, him and his office, in advocating for democracy in Cuba and freedom. Thank you, Senator, for your struggle for a free Cuba. I want to recognize, the representative of an island nation like ours who is fighting for its freedom against a totalitarian monster and has not backed down in its fight and continues to stand for freedom. I'd like to recognize Director General Charles Chow and Vice Director General Claire Chen from the Republic of China and Taiwan. Thank you for being here. I want to recognize Manuel Reyes, que tiene sangre malvisa.
Amén.
Pure Cuban.
Woo!
His family fought very hard for that May 20th to be true, to come to fruition. So I know it's a very special day for him. And I want to recognize one of our best young leaders, Miami Beach Commissioner Alex Fernandez. As we all know, communism uses art for its propaganda. And one of the tools the regime has used for the decades, solo Bambang.
That's true.
Thanks to the leadership of Alex Fernandez, the city of Miami Beach will not be boasting of Bambang in the concert. Thank you, Alex. When Alex does things, he doesn't take credit. He just comes through for taking principled stance for a free Cuba. I admire him greatly, just like I admire Manolo and everybody here who are elected officials. The Assembly of the Cuban Resistance, consisting of 41 organizations inside and outside Cuba, is glad that we come together on this day to remember our independence and to strengthen our fight for freedom. The communists have said much about what happened on May 20th, 1903. A 4-year occupation of Cuba by the United States ended. But let's talk about that occupation. Number one, it ended a genocide. 200,000 Cubans had died in la concentración. Number two, the U.S. brought schools, roads, public hygiene. 1,000 Cuban teachers were taken to, I forget whether Harvard or Yale, to be instructed as teachers, and they were the bulwark of our excellent public education system in the Republic. And the governor of every province was a Cuban general for the War of Independence. I didn't know that fact until very recently. Was it an occupation? It was an empowerment of the Cuban people to assume their independence. The Plata Amendment was another story. Eventually, it did not do what it was supposed to do for Cuban freedom. But overall, Cuba prospered. No other Latin American country grew like Cuba did in the first 10, 20, 30 years of the Republic. By 1959, a country that was ravaged by war was one of the leading Latin American economies. And the Cubans did that in proximity, in trade, in a good relationship with the United States. There's no reason to be ashamed of that. That made us Cubans. And Cuba, we remember, the wealthy, prosperous Cuba. That Cuba where our art, our culture flourished, it happened as a result of that republic. In the first 5, 10 years, all Cubans of all races had upward mobility. Literacy rates shot up in the first 5 years of the republic. In some provinces, the literacy rates rose as much as 120% because of the Cuban public school system. Those facts have been forgotten, but they shouldn't be forgotten, because that was the republic that we remember today. And one day we will rebuild that republic. Hoy nos hemos reunido porque estamos luchando en base a realidades. No, amigo, es una realidad la lucha dentro de Cuba. Todas las semanas hay evidencia de resistencia de una manera o de otra dentro de Cuba contra ese régimen. Las respaldamos todas. Todas son legítimas frente a un régimen ilegítimo que nos ha robado nuestras libertades públicas, que ha aplastado a la nación, que destruyó el aparato productivo cubano. Es justa y necesaria la lucha contra ese régimen. Y hemos visto a nuestro pueblo tirarse a las calles. Lo más reciente fue en Caimanera. En esa lucha, en esa participación, en esa organización, buscando y procurando el paro nacional, está la Asamblea de la Resistencia Cubana y sus 41 organizaciones y simpatizantes y miembros. Y hay otra lucha que es real, es la lucha internacional. Sadly so, the main financing of the communist regime in Cuba today is not coming from Russia and China, who lend money. It's coming from the European Union, which invests money. And that money is being used to buy Russian wheat. It's being used to pay off the Chinese. It's the Club of Paris and the European Union financing that regime. And the Spanish government has acted as the bodyguard of that regime in Europe to make sure this funding keeps on going. But a major achievement has taken place in the past 2 weeks. The government of Sweden, which has the presidency of the European Union, said that the agreement between the Castro regime and Europe should be reviewed. And several organizations are working on that. One of them is the Cuban Independence. Hemos venido a buscar apoyo para esa lucha, una lucha efectiva que la estamos viendo diariamente dentro de Cuba y efectiva que la estamos viendo internacionalmente en diferentes frentes. La Unión Europea, con los sindicatos latinoamericanos, sí, los sindicatos. Ustedes vieron recientemente como 28 partidos políticos de América Latina anunciaron que iban a adoptar a las presas de Cuba. A las presas políticas. Y hoy les pedimos respaldo. Gracias por su presencia, gracias por estar aquí, gracias por venir a este seminario. Por favor, ayúdenos con los bonos que están a la entrada disponibles, bonos de contribución a la Asamblea. Todo eso se va a utilizar puntualmente para los esfuerzos de unidad, de acción, de influencia, de respaldo a la lucha que estamos llevando a cabo en diferentes frentes. Y yo quisiera, ya para terminar mi palabra, este salón está lleno de hombres y mujeres que han luchado sin pedir permiso y con todo lo que tienen por la libertad de Cuba. Ellos han hecho especialmente vivo y vigente el 20 de mayo. En representación del salón está lleno de combatientes cubanos, pero en representación de todos ellos, yo quisiera que se parara Luis Crespo y que diéramos un respaldo y un reconocimiento a la lucha cubana por la libertad. Luis, por favor. Gracias por estar aquí. And now I would like to introduce a champion of Cuban freedom and our senator from Florida, Senator Rick Scott.
Good morning. Buenos dias. So before I start my prepared, it's nice to be here in Orlando. Thank you for the introduction, and thank each and every one of you for what you do. Before I get started my prepared remarks, I just want to make sure you know what I can do as your senator. Christine Perdue runs one of our 9 offices in Florida. any ideas you have, any ideas with regard to democracy and freedom in Latin America, anything you think I need to do, tell me. This is representative government. The more ideas I have, the more I can do. The breadth of issues in the Senate is overwhelming. And just because you get elected, you don't become a genius. Maybe people think you do, but so give me your ideas, and I will fight for freedom in Latin America. I'll fight for freedom in Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua. I'm going to continue to fight for Taiwan. But first off, it's an honor to be here. Earlier this month, the brave Cuban people took to the streets again calling for freedom, democracy, and patria vida. In response, as we saw with the videos, the illegitimate communist Cuban regime met their cries with brutal oppression, persecution, and torture. It was a repeat of what we saw 2 years ago when the regime's thugs and security forces unlawfully detained more than 1,400 demonstrators, including leaders from Cuban civil society groups such as Jose Danier of Paco, the San Isidro movement, the Ladies in White, and targeted religious and Afro-Cuban leaders. Earlier, in the face of these disgusting assaults on human rights, the Cuban people are not afraid, and brave democracy activists are willing to give everything, even their lives, to reclaim their freedom. Today, we have the opportunity to celebrate Cuban Independence Day. So let me ask you this. What could have been a more fitting moment to demand an end to the horrific oppression of the illegitimate communist Cuban regime than today? I want to be very clear. It's a time for the United States to recognize their bravery and for Joe Biden to stop this weak appeasement that only enables this brutal regime. The United States must be a leader in the defense of human rights, democracy, and freedom in our hemisphere and all over the world. We must oppose our enemies and stand up for our friends. That starts with being strong in our opposition to the illegitimate Castro Diaz-Canel dictatorship. We know that Joe Biden has the power to join Cuban people to call for an end to the communist rule in Cuba. But aside from a couple of statements he's made, Joe Biden has not taken any action to support the Cuban people and their fight for freedom. I think it's disgusting. It was only after I spent nearly 2 years calling out these violence that he finally joined us in calling for the immediate release of all political prisoners. One time. He only did it after I started withholding. I held all their ambassadors up. So one thing you can do in there is you have the power to slow down the process. And they wouldn't do anything, so I held up all the ambassadors in Latin America. I talked to Blinken multiple times. It was unbelievably difficult to get Biden to do anything. It was disgusting. So I did that. So he made one statement after I held up his ambassadors for quick approval. So we had to force him to do what he should be doing as a leader of the free world every day. It's not enough. He's still done nothing to provide Cubans with internet connections, which after a year ago July, they promised they would help. And they didn't. They've done nothing to support the democracy movement in Cuba. The President of the United States is known both here and around the world as the leader of the free world. He needs to start acting like it. Our President, regardless of who it is, has immense power to rally our democratic allies and the freedom-loving people of the world to put pressure on oppressive regimes like the one occupying Havana, and throw the full support of the global community behind the Cuban people's movement for freedom. But Joe Biden does nothing. He doesn't even try. Instead, he and the administration have bowed to the demands of Cuba's murderous Castro Diaz-Canel regime and chosen not to stand for democracy or human rights. When the President of the United States doesn't stand up to Castro Diaz-Canel, we are left with a destabilized hemisphere and world that is less peaceful and puts our homeland security at greater risk. Look at Maduro in Venezuela or Ortega in Nicaragua. These men are murderous thugs. but they have friends in high places. The new president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, is Maduro's buddy, and President Biden gave him a big welcome at the White House recently and never said a word about human rights.
Shame.
Not one word. It's a horrible message to send to Latin America and our partners and allies around the globe that the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, is willing to look the other way when it comes to human rights, freedom, and democracy. And you better believe that Iran, Russia, Communist China, North Korea, they all love it when Biden is nice to their friends in Latin America. We cannot allow our leaders to pretend that what happens in Latin America has no impact on democracy around the world. In April of last year, I had the honor of visiting Lithuania to meet with a number of leaders to become the first U.S. senator to visit the Taiwanese representative office there. This small nation will not soon forget the value of its freedom and has put its dedication to democracy into action by advocating for peace across Europe, the end of tyranny in Russia, and the need for an ironclad commitment to human rights in the face of increasing threats from Communist China. I think the current administration and the entire world can learn a lesson from the bravery shown by the Lithuanian people and their government. It is remarkable that a nation of less than 3 million people has had such a profound impact in the fight for democracy across the globe and against our common enemies. Not only has Lithuania stood unapologetically beside Taiwan and in support of its democracy, it has countered the illegitimate communist dictatorship in Cuba by opposing a planned European Union investment treaty with the evil Castro Diaz-Canel regime. And by themselves, they've been able to stop this. And but for them, that treaty would have happened. While in Lithuania, I made sure the people of Lithuania knew that the people of Florida are truly grateful to have a partner in Lithuania that understands the importance of standing up for human rights. It is clear that the United States does not have the luxury of ignoring world events and existing in a vacuum. To confront the issues facing our world and protect U.S. national security, we must build our partnerships, not just with traditional powers and friends, but with young democracies like Lithuania, Cyprus, and others who understand the value and the importance of freedom. Of course, saying those things is essential, but it's not enough. We have to start demanding action. In the United States Senate, I am fighting every day to protect America's national security interests, our global economic strength, and make sure that tyrants around the world clearly understand America's resolve to strongly support and eliminate the spread of socialism and communism around the world. Earlier this year, I joined with my friend from Louisiana, Senator John Kennedy, to introduce the crucial Communism Teaching Act to help educate students about the history and the disease and the dangers of communism. Every person in this room understands that America is the beacon of freedom, and there's no place else to go. And it's the beacon of democracy around the world. These are the principles our nation was founded on. But that isn't common thinking in Washington. Today, many in our capital believe in the failed policies of socialism and communist nations. While they might be misguided, the American people are smart, and our crucial Communism Teaching Act will make education materials available to students that shine light on the dangers of communism in our society. For many families, especially here in the great state of Florida, the United States has been a stark contrast to the communist rule that once stripped them of their freedom, liberty, and basic human rights and dignity. So our message is clear. We will never let communism infect America. I'm also calling on Joe Biden to support the Democracy Act, legislation I introduced last year. Last September, on the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month, I gathered members of Congress and Hispanic democracy activists in front of the White House to urge President Biden to support the Democracy Act. In sending a clear message, the time for freedom and democracy in Latin America is now. Our Democracy Act would hold the illegitimate communist Cuban regime accountable through severe sanctions and unprecedented financial pressure, and put safeguards in place to ensure those sanctions are not lifted ever until Cuba is free.
Amen.
Also require the president to establish a task force to develop long-term solutions to provide reliable internet access to the people of Cuba so that it is not censored or blocked by the Cuban regime. Now is the time for action. We have to expect more out of our elected leaders. America, unfortunately, has enemies around the globe that want to destroy our way of life. We did not choose to be enemies with them. They chose to be enemies with us. And the one thing that unites these evil regimes is their hate to America and their commitment, and our commitment to strong freedom, liberty around the world. So the fight for freedom and democracy is not just a noble cause for us, it is an essential cause for us. America's national security depends on it. Where there is freedom and democracy, America has strong allies. Where there is freedom and democracy, America has trusted trade partners. Where there is freedom and democracy, America has stability. And where there is tyranny and oppression, America has none of these. That is what's at stake in our fight for freedom and democracy in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and everywhere else around the world that threatens their countries, the people of their countries, and us. Keeping this fight up can be exhausting. And I know many people here have to be tired. But we have to stay the course. We have no choice. There's no place else to go. We have to create freedom, make sure we have freedom here and fight for it around the world. Every day you can make a difference, and I know every day you try to make a difference. By making your voices heard. Keep fighting. To the people of Cuba, we stand with you. Soon, there will be a new day of freedom and democracy. Soon, a new day of freedom from communist rule. The freedom of Cuba is closer than ever, and we're not going to stop until we see a new day of freedom, democracy, and patria vida in Cuba. Hoy, 20 de mayo, commemoramos el Día de la Independencia de Cuba. Así que quiero preguntarles esto. ¿Qué mejor momento que este para exigir la independencia de la presión del ilegítimo régimen comunista cubano? La dictadura sigue atacando, secuestrando, torturando y matando a los manifestantes pacíficos y a los líderes de Paco, San Isidro, Cuba Decide y las Damas de Blanco. Más de 1,400 cubanos, incluyendo menores de edad, han sido justamente arrestados por el ilegítimo régimen comunista cubano. José Daniel Ferrer sigue en prisión y está siendo aislado y torturado en el intento de acabar con su vida.
Sí.
¿Dónde está Joe Biden?
¿Dónde está?
¿Dónde está el presidente? ¿Qué ha hecho? Nada.
Nada.
Nada bueno para el pueblo de Cuba. Por eso, después de las protestas del 11 de julio, presenté mi ley de democracia, que autoriza al presidente a imponer sanciones al régimen cubano por corrupción y violaciones a los derechos humanos. Y también brinde servicios de Internet al valiente pueblo cubano.
Nunca lo hizo.
Cuba debe continuar en la lista de estados patrocinadores de terrorismo hasta que sea libre y democrático. Más que nunca, la administración Biden debe ser coherente con sus palabras y detener su débil apartamento ilegítimo de una vez por todas. La libertad de Cuba está más cerca que nunca y no vamos a parar hasta ver un nuevo día de libertad, democracia y patria y vida en Cuba.